Interruptions are annoying. Interruptions are annoying. We have all experienced the tension of trying to get out the door. Trying to get out the door. Have you ever yelled at somebody? I'm just trying to get out the door. Maybe some of you are very probably saying, I'm just trying to get out of the door. But in our house, we just say, I'm trying to get out the door. But the phone rings. Or a kid forgets something. Or you realize once you get into the daylight that your pants are not the ones you wanted because you got dressed in the dark of Saskatchewan in the wintertime. Or that your sweater's on backward. That just happened to me? No. Man, I've mismatched my pants so many times in the dark. Sometimes getting out the door is tough. And we get interrupted. And it's annoying. This is the kind of flap and tension that is set up by Mark in the second half of chapter 5. In this story, time is of the essence. There's a child who's sick. Jesus has been called. But Mark takes his time and expands this story longer than any of the other gospel writers. Mark provides lots of detail, and in so doing welcomes us into the very real lives of the people and characters of this event. What kind of detail? Just pause on that for a second. Well, like that the woman who had been hemorrhaging for 12 years, that the little girl was 12 years old. These are details that most gospel writers don't always give us, and especially the words in Aramaic that were spoken. Talitha kum, rise, little girl. There's not many places in the gospel where the words of Jesus, the actual Aramaic words, are given to us. That means Mark is really into the details of this story and wants us to really get into the depths of the lives and the real people and the real situation here. Let's not breeze by chapter 5, 21 to 42. And in those very real lives and the really real people of this event, Mark sets up a lot of tension. And in this tension is the very real story of family. A nuclear family, Jairus and his daughter, and also the family of the community of believers, the larger family bound by faith and custom. There's a large crowd, we're told. Jesus has come back to the other side of the river. Remember last week? We left him, he was over in the Decapolis, in the Gentile side of the lake. Now he's come back to Capernaum or somewhere on the other side of the lake. He's back and a large crowd gathers to meet him. And Jairus, one of the leaders of the synagogue, pushes through the crowd, comes and falls on his knees. A leader of the synagogue falls on his knees and prostrates himself in front of Jesus, begging him, pleading with him to heal his daughter, who is sick in bed, near death. Jesus goes at once. He does not hesitate. And it says then, Jesus went and the crowd pressed in on him. It's a funny detail. And the crowd pressed in on him. It speaks of a tough journey of like you come out of TCU place after a concert, you kind of bump into people and jostle, and people are trying to get the coat check, and think about that, being pressed in on. And Jesus is, walking carefully, and maybe Big Peter's going in front of him trying to make a hole for Jesus, and there's just a lot of jostling and pushing. It's a tight crowd. They've pushed in on him. The going is tough, but Jesus continues to move forward. But then he's interrupted by one of the strangest things in the gospel. It says he felt the power go out of him. Nowhere else in the whole of the four gospels does it say anything about the power going out of Jesus. It says he felt the power go out of him. And he turns and he asks the question, who touched my clothes? Who touched my clothes? For I felt the power go out of me. And the disciples answer him, I just love this. How can you say who touched your clothes? Everybody's touching your clothes. That's what they say. It's just beautiful. I love the disciples. God loved them. They say the stuff we would have said. Right? They say, Jesus, you're surrounded by people. It's a tough crowd. We're moving slowly. We're being pushed and shoved. Everybody is touching you. What do you mean, who touched your clothes? But we know who. because a woman, I just love this image. Look. Look, this image speaks so much. You see the little light? Can you see the light between her finger and the hem? It speaks of a woman who's on the ground. It speaks of a woman who has clambered to Jesus, who has crawled through the tough crowd, pushing and shoving, unknown by the people because she'd been held on the outside. Even in her own family home, she wouldn't have been visible very often, because a woman who's menstruating, Leviticus chapter 15, a woman who is menstruating was not to share a sofa or sitting arrangements or a room with the people in the house, or to share a table or a meal. So even her friends would have only seen her when they were alone with her, but maybe at a distance. Like, there's all these laws around women. So 12 years she had been held out. Still a family member, but not a family member. She shows such determination and courage. The line is, if only I could touch the hem of his robe. It's this faith that has helped her clamber and crawl her way to Jesus. She comes forward and admits it was she who received the healing, because she felt it immediately. 12 years of hemorrhaging, of bleeding, you'd know. 12 years, and it disappears. And she says, in fear and trembling, it was me. This beautiful scene continues, this beautiful interruption. Jesus calls her daughter. Your faith has healed you. Daughter. She has been ritually unclean for 12 years. She has been outside of her own regular family life and the family life of the community. And in one word, Jesus brings her back in. Daughter. He's on his way to help a daughter, but on the way is interrupted by another daughter. And he brings her back into the fold by using the language of family. Honestly, one of the most beautiful pieces of Scripture, I think. And in case we had forgotten the tension in the middle of this sweet healing moment, people arrive from Jairus' house. In case we've got caught up in how sweet it is, and beautiful, and lovely, and healing, and grace-filled, people arrive from Jairus' house and announce the girl's death, and they speak these words of faithlessness that ramps up the tension even more. Why bother the teacher anymore? I mean, dead is dead, right? Why bother the teacher anymore? She's gone. Jesus had given more attention to this menstruating woman than she had even expected herself. She thought she'd just touch the hem of the robe and that'd be it. But he had spent more time with her, and in those extra minutes, in those grace-filled minutes with this woman, the daughter dies. To which Jesus answers, do not fear, only believe. And he continues to Jairus' house, where they are weeping and wailing. The professional mourners are weeping and wailing, and Jesus says, she's not dead. She is merely sleeping. And they laugh at him. Did you catch that line? And they laughed at him. I don't remember any other scripture lesson where Jesus is laughed at. Jeered, yes. Complained about, maybe. Challenged, but not laughed at. And they laughed at him. The core of this story is interruption. Mark loves a good interrupting story. Interruptions are annoying and bothersome. They cause us to tense up, to become impatient, and in that annoyance, often lose sight of what's very important. This story is a story of interruption that causes faith to fail. An interruption that causes those involved to forget the breadth and power of God's love. For that is what faith is. What is faith except a remembering of God's love? But they forget. The question arises for us, what is it that interrupts our faith? This story presents the same tension we live every day. Faith one moment, faithlessness the next. Faith one moment, oh, I think I got it for 2 days straight. Then Friday comes and something happens. Faithlessness. For sure, life comes along and we forget how much we are loved by God. We forget that God's love will win. That love always wins. But interruptions, they cause us to tense up, become impatient. Our world gets very small, focused on the tension, the hurry, the panic, the self-important tasks we had originally set out to do. Interruptions get in the way. Years ago, Deb and I coined a phrase, I don't know if it's used elsewhere, we coined a phrase for how our days unfold, the ministry of interruption. I love it. I hardly have to plan anything in a week. Tuesday starts, I got a few things at the calendar, I got some stuff I want to do, and it gets interrupted. A phone call, an email, somebody drops in, something else happens, run to the hospital. None of this is complaint, just for the record. You can see the smile on my face. I love a ministry of interruption, to tell you the truth. But it takes a flexibility and a gear shifting that has to be easy. You got to have a loose clutch for the ministry of interruptions. And yet it is the interruption where the Spirit is waiting to teach us, to shape us, to remind us. At Mayfair, we've lived out ministry of interruptions. I mean, let's not forget that this church has burned twice. In the history of Mayfair United Church, 2 buildings lost to fire. Nobody was looking for it. It interrupted ministry a big time. Or in smaller ways, we might have an unexpected guest at worship or come in during the week, or a child poking me during a sermon in order to ask a question. Do I really have to make a turkey hat? Can I make a unicorn hat instead? Do you remember that? Or to alert me to the artwork they just made one Remembrance Sunday. Maya came over. Because I said, show me later what you made. Poke me during the sermon. Or every so often we have a few months of financial tensions in our church that interrupt our faithful living and dreaming. Many times as a congregation, our living into God's love in expected and comfortable ways gets interrupted. We all have our ways of loving, after all, of living out community and faith and family and friendships. We have constructs of love and respect that move us along and keep us safe. Ways of loving that are expected and understood. But God's love interrupts all of that and usually asks for more. God's love interrupts and presses our boundaries and challenges our patience, our peacefulness, and our comfort levels. Well, it's Epiphany. Epiphany is a time of revelation. And revelations, my friends, are interruptions. Writ large. Epiphany and revelations are interruptions. Interruptions to what we've previously understood, believed, or clung to. A revelation is most often an interruption to our comfortable ways, our easy path, our usual ways of seeing. Like a burst of light in the darkness, Epiphany revelation, the love of God as witnessed through Jesus, interrupts us, shakes us up, creates a little trembling in our heart, a wavering of faith maybe, a forgetting of who we truly are and whose we truly are. This year, though, this Epiphany time, let us lean in. Listen to the words of Jesus. Fear not, only believe. Fear not, only believe. And let us hurry with Jesus to the bedside of new life, to the revelation of death-defying love. Let us not just remember that love, but let us rejoice in its light and allow it to change us like never before. Amen.